The pleasure of introducing Bev Lazarou. Bev works almost 30 years in the domestic violence sector, and she worked as a senior subject officer with the Women's Domestic Violence Coordination Program at Bev Lazarou for nearly 9 years. In her role, she provides domestic violence advice and support in relation to practice issues and relationship building with key parts in the community sector, such as New South Wales Police. And then previously worked for 12 years as a coordinator of a women's domestic violence court advocacy service in Metro Sydney. Now currently Bev is also involved in the rollout of Safer Pathways, the New South Wales Government's new model of service delivery for domestic violence victims in New South Wales. Bev's very excited about the improved outcomes already experienced by women and children through this process. So I'm really pleased to introduce Bev and hear what she has to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, technical nightmares. I was going to attempt to show you, I was going to show you a video of a SAM meeting at the end of the presentation, and I think that's what's done us in, because it's now destroyed everything on that flash drive, I think, on that USB. So I apologise, and I'll have to just do the PowerPoint without the PowerPoint up there, and bear with me. So thanks for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be here to talk about Safer Pathway. And I suppose what it is, in a nutshell, is a new coordinated approach, more coordinated approach to responding to domestic and family violence in New South Wales. There's a broader framework of reforms that the state government is implementing, and this is one element. Safer Pathway is one element of the rest of those reforms, which incorporates some offender programs, strengthening the domestic violence workforce, some better evaluation across the state, and the new Safer Pathway service delivery model commenced in Orange and Waverley in September 2014. They were the two launch sites. So some of you may be familiar with the service that's running, the local coordination point that's running in Orange. And we expanded to Tweed Heads, Broken Hill, Bankstown and Parramatta in July 2015. Minister Goward has just announced 19 more sites rolling out this coming financial year. We've been waiting on that announcement really since before Christmas, and so we're really pleased she's made the announcement. We don't have the locations yet, so I can't give you any information about that, but I know that the Minister's very keen on a more accelerated rollout, so there'll be 19 in this financial year. We think March or May will be the final launch of those 19, and then in the next financial year there'll be another maybe 11 or so, and we'll wait for those. So you know, that's really good news. So the background is that the It Stops Here reforms, the broader reforms, were launched by the Minister in February 2014. They were built on the recommendations that came out of a number of reports, but two major ones. The New South Wales Auditor-General's report in 2011, Responding to Domestic and Family Violence. And in 2012, the recommendations came out of a parliamentary inquiry into domestic violence trends and issues. It was a really thorough investigation by a Senate committee where they went into the field in a number of areas around New South Wales, looking at the whole process from police involvement right through the court process, referrals, case management, a whole range of things. So some good recommendations came out of that report. They absolutely recognise the really excellent work that is being done in New South Wales, but both those reports highlighted the need for better coordination, a more consistent approach that was more cooperative between agencies so that people were working in less isolation. So the aim, of course, is for all domestic violence victims to be provided a consistent, effective and a proactive response. to prevent victims from having to retell their story multiple times. We know that when women, and I refer to victims generally as women, but we know that when victims retell their stories numerous times, it puts them straight back into that traumatic situation again. And when services are working in isolation and not sharing information, that's commonly what happens as people go through the process to obtain protection and then on to case management. So we certainly have had changes to legislation allowing for information to be shared between agencies, and that's targeted information that has to be relevant to the immediate safety of those victims. Organisations don't have to share information, but the legislation allows for that to happen. The model is based on the model of service delivery that has been occurring in South Australia for some time, but they didn't have the challenge of privacy legislation that we had to sort of get through in New South Wales, which was quite tight and took a long time to come to terms with that and then to make those changes. It's also based on a model of service delivery in the UK called MARIC, loosely. But if you want to have a look at those two models online, certainly do so. So this point would have been really good to have a slide, which would have looked like this, if you can see it at all. A really excellent way for you to visually see what happens. So there are 4 components. So we're now getting into really to the actual practical side of this. So the first component is what we call a DVSAT, a Domestic Violence Safety Assessment Tool. And it's undertaken by police at every domestic violence incident they attend, particularly intimate partner violence. And I'll talk about each of these components in more detail in a minute. So that safety assessment is done initially. That information goes via an electronic platform through victim services to that platform is called a central referral point. No people at that stage. Police send it to that platform by the end of their shift, so it's quick. And then that information is speared out via postcode to the appropriate location according to the victim's residential address. So even if the incident has happened in another location, and an example might be, something that happens in Sydney over a weekend, but the person's living here in Parkes, that referral would come out to Parkes so the person could be on-referred to services locally. So that central referral point sends the information on to a local coordination point. These are the new parts of the WDV CAS, like the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service. Our Central West Service that's located in Orange now has a local coordination point with workers funded to do that work separate to the WDV CAS work. And from that local coordination point, contact is made with the client. I'll talk about that further as well. And then on from that, the 4th element is the safety action meeting, that you're going to see the DVD of in operation. And that's for people who are considered or assessed at serious threat. There are only 2 levels of threat, at threat and serious threat. And I'll explain those as well in a moment. That domestic violence safety assessment tool is a tool just to assess that threat level, particularly of further harm, serious injury or death. It consists of a Part A, which is 25 questions the police will ask a victim at the scene, and if the person answers yes to more than 12 of those questions, they're considered at serious threat. The questions are evidence-based questions and they're known indicators of serious threat in domestic and family violence. There's a Part B to the tool, and that is where police can use their professional judgment to make a call if the woman is unable to answer the questions, if there's a refusal to answer those questions. The scene of an incident when police go out as I'm sure many of you are aware, can be chaotic. Perpetrator, they may be trying to separate the perpetrator from the victim, but the victim's still very aware that woman, as I said, it may be a man, but the victim's very aware of the presence of that perpetrator, so it can certainly impact on their ability to answer those questions, think clearly. Obviously, children are upset, the house has been trashed, and as well, the victim may not have a good relationship with police historically, so might be not inclined at all to engage. But the police may still see from all that's happening that there's certainly the woman feels terrified, even though she's saying that she isn't. So they may decide, based on their professional judgment, their experience, that they will assess someone at serious threat. As I said, the 25 questions are asked of intimate partners at those incidents, because a lot of those questions do relate to people in an intimate relationship. There were some sexual relationship type questions in there. Certainly wouldn't be suitable if you're talking to people in an incident where they were parent-child or siblings, for instance. So as I said before, the domestic violence safety assessment tool is then sent electronically by the end of the officer's shift as part of this new referral process. That central referral point at Victim Services at Department of Justice receives those referrals, as I said, distributes them via victim's postcode. Male victims are referred to Victim Services, so they would receive the same referral-based service or referral into a safety action meeting via workers at Victim Services. Because WDV CASs, the Court Advocacy Services, only provide service to women and children. We hope that non-police agencies will be able to use that central referral point in the future. At the moment, it's only police and local courts that can refer in that way, but that's purely a financial issue. We hope that we'll be able to develop systems that will allow people to refer via that system. You can absolutely refer to a local coordination point. NGOs, in whatever way you do your referrals now, you may have already good working relationships with those services in your area, so you'd make a phone call. You might have a system where you do it by email. Whatever is your system, you absolutely can refer your clients in and do your own risk assessments if you already do that, or you're welcome to use the domestic violence safety assessment tool that's on the website. I'll give you the website at the end of this presentation. That website has all of the tools and information on it that you need. The DVSAT, the safety assessment tool for you, is not the same as the police one. It doesn't have some of the components of the police one, but the questions are the same. We're certainly encouraging, government's encouraging as well, people to use that safety assessment tool for consistency, so we're all measuring threat in the same way. But if you have a tool that you already use that's useful and is working for you, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But please don't hesitate. Once the service comes to this area, if you want to refer someone, do it in your normal way. So when I talked about at threat and serious threat, if matters come through at threat, when this local coordination point worker makes contact with that client, in the first, they have to do it by the end of the next business day, consent is required for them to keep going after that point. So if they have a conversation with the victim and they say, I don't want anything to do with you, I don't want any assistance, then it's over at that point. Nothing. They've really, the change in legislation has also shifted that point from the police at the incident obtaining consent to this, at this point, obtaining consent. Because it was thought that the scene of a DV incident was not really the time for police to be talking to people about consenting to on referrals and so on. It's different for people who are assessed at serious threat. even though those workers would still be seeking consent, always seek consent, it's best practice to do so. But if the woman said no, and they definitely were at serious threat, the worker would be saying, well, because of our concern for your safety, because of the history of your situation, your matter will be referred into a safety action meeting for consideration. There's also room for regrading those matters. So if a matter comes through from police at serious threat or at threat, the local coordination point worker talks to the person. Very likely they're going to find out more information than the police would have anyway. And some of the work might have already been done to keep that person safe. So they may regrade that, make it lower or higher, vice versa, but they have to do it in consultation with the domestic violence liaison officer. The local coordination point would certainly be making ongoing referrals for those clients, whether they're at threat or at serious threat. It's not case management at that point, it's case coordination, and they'd be referring on for the ongoing needs of the client. So the other role of the local coordination point workers is to provide secretarial support to the safety action meeting. As I said, they're hosted by the 28 WDV CASs across New South Wales, and the work is absolutely separate from the regular court advocacy work. WDV CASs were chosen to host these services because of their spread already across New South Wales. They probably are the only specialist domestic violence service that is located generally right across the state. They have very strong relationships with police that they work with daily, and that infrastructure to support that. So safety action meetings is the end point, the last element of the new model, and it is a process, a meeting that's to reduce threats to victims through that targeted information sharing. It has to be targeted, has to relate to that immediate safety, because that's what a safety action meeting is about. It's not case management. The only information that's not targeted is information that comes up around child protection, because legislation already allows for sharing of that information if it's necessary. The meetings are conducted fortnightly in local areas, and the focus, as I said, is reducing that immediate threat. They're chaired by police, by the crime manager from the local area command, and they're attended by senior representatives from each agency that deals with domestic violence. I'll name them in a sec, and NGOs as well, and they need to be people who have the power to make decisions at the table. They can't take information back to the office to discuss with their manager or their team and then come back to the meeting again. They have to come with information if they have any, and they need to be able to make a decision as to what their agency can do. It's been challenging in terms of at these meetings, workers are very accustomed, all the people around the table, at case managing clients. So to talk about things in an immediate way and not to kind of fall into that case management way of thinking has probably been one of the challenges for people who participate. So the core members that attend a safety action meeting are New South Wales Police, the local coordination point workers, corrective services, Department of Education, New South Wales Health, which includes often a number of people, drug and alcohol services, mental health services, emergency at the local hospital, and also FACS, which incorporates both housing and child protection. Non-government agencies attend, or non-government organisations attend according to if they're already working with the client, and so they will already have a rapport with that person, or they would be invited to, and so they would be invited to attend the safety action meeting on that basis. Or there are some services that virtually see most domestic violence victims in an area. Like in Orange, there's Operation Courage that see most people anyway, so they would generally be at the table at most meetings. There's usually a representative from the Indigenous community and a representative from called, or what we now say are multicultural services. The process at a safety action meeting is that the local coordination point worker would circulate that agenda at least 3 days before the meeting. Mostly we find they go out minimum 5 days before, because all of those agencies need to do searches on their systems to see if there's any relevant information there already that they need to bring to the meeting. At the meeting, the members share that information where it's relevant to build a comprehensive picture of that victim's circumstances and needs. The local coordination point worker would have had contact with the victim by phone at least before the meeting, and so they would be presenting the victim's wishes if the victim had wishes at that point, because these plans and this information is not imposed on victims of domestic violence. So a safety action plan would be developed for each matter on the agenda, which is a list of actions aimed at reducing the threat to the victim's safety. If services don't have any information, that's okay. They don't need to have anything. They just bring the information to the table that they have. I talked a little bit before about the information sharing that's now allowed through the change to legislation. When we went down to South Australia to have a look at their model in operation, they were really surprised about the challenges for us around doing that, because they have not had any privacy legislation to contend with in South Australia, and their view is, why wouldn't you share information? Certainly we had a lot of pushback at the beginning of this process before we rolled out the first 2 sites in relation to information sharing, because in New South Wales we're very accustomed to working very confidentially within our own agencies and not sharing any information unless with express written or verbal permission from the client. But we had access to a few coroner's reports down there, and they were so eye-opening in terms of information sharing. There was one that I'll never forget, a really horrendous homicide where that family was working with 18 different services for a fairly lengthy period of time, and none of those services were talking to each other. And it was really evident by the coroner's recommendations or report at the end what a difference that might have made if people had been sharing that relevant information. At the beginning of every safety action meeting, the members or the participants have to sign a confidentiality agreement that's read out at the beginning of every meeting, and it's read out at every meeting so that people are reminded very strongly of their responsibilities in that regard. They also have to declare any conflicts they might have, and if that's going to present an issue for their participation, they'd step out of the room while that matter's being dealt with. So as I said, the actions that might be developed at a safety action meeting are for agencies, they're not for clients or not for victims. The question's always about, where is the victim at this time, where's the perpetrator, where are the children, what can we do to keep them safe? So when that plan's developed, then when it's relayed back to that victim, she may say, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't, if a recommendation might be that she move out of town because of the ongoing threat from the perpetrator, she may say, look, the kids are happy in school, they're settled, they're doing well, my family's here, I have supports here and connections, I don't want to go. Totally up to her. But the whole purpose of this is to have some options for people. We've certainly had great results where people have been moved really quickly, within a couple of days, from a town through Department of Housing. I know that's not always possible in every area of the state, but certainly that's happened a lot. That's been one of the major advantages of this process. It enables people to get in quickly to services. Some priority is given in terms of referrals. But again, if people don't want to engage at that point, it's totally up to them. Actions are really specific and targeted, and it might be about advising the kid's school about the conditions of an AVO, advising a victim about the imminent release of perpetrator from custody, and putting them onto a priority list for accommodation. But in my experience, we've found they haven't even needed to go onto a priority housing list because housing has been able to be found fast. Education might be providing some support to children at school and just keeping a watching eye on them in that environment. As I said, SAMs are not case management meetings. Victims don't stay on the agenda for any length of time, usually twice, to ensure there's accountability measures to make sure that if people undertake to do something, by the next meeting, when they come back to the table, that's been done. So a person would only remain on the agenda if there was further things that hadn't been resolved. So implementation statewide. Currently police are doing that DVSAT, the safety assessment tool at every incident, and making those automatic referrals through the central referral point. That's happening anyway and is happening via you may be aware of the domestic violence justice strategy that's now been incorporated into these reforms. So under that justice strategy, those things are required to be done anyway. The 6 Safer Pathway sites are operating really well, and the next steps are, now we've got that announcement from the Minister for the next 19 sites, will be for us to find out where they are so we can start negotiating in those local areas, meeting with agencies, with NGOs. There's a lot of change management that needs to occur so that people feel they want to participate in the process. We had a lot of pushback initially about women or victims not being at the table at a safety action meeting. But we have found that there haven't been any negatives from that. The information presented certainly accounts for that woman's wishes and her individual needs. And as I said, she's not required to take any of the plan up if she doesn't want to. There's a BOXAR evaluation being undertaken at the moment. The process evaluation finishes at the end of December, and the report from that hopefully that will be distributed widely, but Women New South Wales are making those decisions, and there's an outcome evaluation that's going to be lengthier, of course, and that will be completed in 2018. So at this point, the slide behind me would be showing you the website that you can look at, but it's www.domesticviolence, 4 words, no space, .newsouthwales.gov.au, and that has all of the tools, everything in relation to the wider reforms, so please have a look. That's it for me talking. I don't know what to say to you about the DVD. Would have been great for you to have a look at. It is. It's not a real safety action meeting, but it virtually is. It's at our Broken Hill site, and it is all the people who participate at that meeting, including the crime manager who chairs it, running through the whole process of a meeting from the beginning to end, as they would normally. So hopefully, certainly when we start to come out to this area, if this area is one of the areas to be rolled out soon, we'll be showing it to you then at information sessions.
Bev, I found personally I enjoyed not having the distraction
good.
of PowerPoint. I listen better than I do when there's PowerPoint.
Well, I'll take that on board. Maybe I won't worry about
it.
it.
Yeah, going back to the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Just
Yep.
And I was part of the planning process from health before the SAMs were set up in Orange. What I want to ask is there talk of appropriate additional funding being provided? Because
Yes.
I'm very aware of the time required to prepare for the meetings, because Orange meetings are typically big.
Yep.
20 plus people discussed every
Yep.
night. And you know, people need to access not only the victims but the children's files and, you know.
Absolutely.
It's very time consuming.
Did everyone hear that question? We've been advocating from the beginning, like after the first 2 sites rolled out, it became really evident what the impost was on the other services at the table, particularly health. And in Eastern Sydney, where our Waverley SAM operates, where there's a number of major hospitals and a whole range of other health services in the area. And I know Orange has a lot of health services as well. We had meetings with health in eastern suburbs, and I have to say they really just drew a map for me about their information systems. It just blew me away. And I know that sounds, it's like telling someone what Las Vegas is like. Well, you have to be there to experience it. But there were so many different services at the top, and under all of those there were a lot of other services as well, information systems, and there were layer upon layer upon layer of those, and none of them talk to each other. So for them to search their systems for each client, and obviously health is going to have probably something on every person on the agenda mostly, and children then had to be searched separately, because if they're admitted to the health system, they're admitted under their own name, so they couldn't search for those kids under the the adult names. So we're absolutely aware. We've been advocating for a really long time. I know that health and FACS had put in some budget bid for some enhancement to allow them to continue, and I don't know what the outcome of that has been. We're also at the moment doing a review of the SAM process, so that in some areas they're reducing the number of people from health who are at the table, so that one person comes but brings all the information for the other departments. And that's been really helpful if you get the right person at the table. But of course they've got to make decisions for those other departments as well sometimes.
And it's often understanding subspecialisations too.
Yeah. So we're right in the middle of that evaluation or sort of review of the SAM process, where we brought everyone to town, like participants on a SAM, government agencies that are making those sorts of decisions that you've talked about. And so we hope something's going to come of that, because we absolutely understand it's not just the time that people come to the meeting, and I know at Orange their meetings are blown out as well in terms of length, but it's all of that time before the meeting in gathering that information. And health is probably the organisation that's affected the most because of their information systems. Yeah, they have in eastern suburbs employed a person to look at the whole process, and that person is the one that's been coming to the Waverley SAM and bringing all the information as well, along with a couple of others, I think, from St Vincent's. Sure.
Hi, I was just wondering what the process is about inviting NGOs, and if there's a reflection on how that's working, because we've had a number of incidences in which we haven't been invited, and the only way that we know that it has been brought is if the person who from Family and Community Services has referred actually knows that that's the case. So often we're missing out on the information, and where the NGOs that are doing case management are able to coordinate it afterwards. So just what that process is like to actually have NGOs present, because at the moment we're not seeing that recruitment's been taking place.
Thanks. I absolutely take your point about that. The only way that the SAM or the SAM coordinator and the LCP worker would find out who the client's working with when the referral comes through is when they talk to the client. So if they talk to the client says, you know, I'm currently working with a family support worker or a DV counselling service or whatever it might be, the local coordination point worker should be ringing that service and having that discussion and inviting them. If that's not happening, and I can certainly take that back and have a discussion with Orange about it, but I'd make contact with the local coordination point at Orange. Erin Beedman's the coordinator there, and see how you go having that discussion. Because we would really want you at the table, because you've got that, you know, you may have a long-term relationship with that client. You can have a lot of information. The client, the woman's going to, or the client, I find it really difficult not to say woman. The client is going to trust you, and we would want to make sure that the woman's wishes and her express needs are considered at that meeting. So the person that's going to bring that is a service that's been working with her for a long period of time.
Bev, can I just say that I work at Carrick Family Support through the Neighbourhood Centre. I work through the Neighbourhood Centre and Family Support, and I work very closely with Penny Watt, and do get a lot of referrals from Penny.
Yep.
And I don't actually go to the SAM meetings myself either, but Penny's always chasing them up to say how they're going. Is there anything you want me to take to the meeting? So yeah, so maybe it's a case of speaking to the coordinator and just saying, you know, I've got some concerns. Can you please take this to the meeting? Because I know physically I haven't got time to go to Orange to the meetings, and I'm quite happy to feed it back to Penny and let Penny deal with it, or present it to the SAMS meetings. Yeah.
Not always. Okay.
Any other questions?
Here's a couple of quick ones. Look, I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit more about the process. For example, if the mother decides not to go through the domestic violence planning, but she has children, that process of actually protecting the kids. And second, I was just wondering, how do you expect that the cooperation, for example, around border areas is going to work? Because there isn't a national strategy, is there?
No, not yet. Yeah, good questions. Well, child protection should be at the forefront for everyone working in domestic violence. It should always be considered. I certainly, over the years, have come through the whole gamut of ways that we've managed that. You know, in the 70s and 80s in the refuge, area, we didn't really go there. It was really difficult to even suggest that if you're working with a woman, you should be considering the protection of those children as well. And even when, because it was thought that you were somehow, you know, the woman was getting the blame, or all the responsibility for everything was being put on the woman for violence that had been perpetrated on her and on the kids. The witnessing of violence by the children wasn't really even in the arena as well. So we've moved a long way from there. And when the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy, or Court Assistance as it was known, started in '96, even amongst the coordinators, because there were only coordinators employed initially, we had so many arguments about it, because there would be that whole, the people who stood for the child protection and DV, you can work with them together, and the people said, no, you can't, they have to be separated. Until now, when we, you know, part of our policy, our written policy, is that our services must, that they're mandatory reporters, they must consider child protection. I've worked in the field for a really long time. I have never experienced, if you deal with it appropriately and in a sensitive way, I've never experienced a situation where women won't have a conversation about those things. We used to make child protection reports at MIDA, we did ICAS en masse. And so, always with the consent of the woman, always with the woman's knowledge before we did that. We would have that conversation at court before we go to that point. So, having said all of that, we've all come along a long way. The police as well. The police are now required to do checks when they go to an incident. They can't just be satisfied that there are children of the relationship, but they're okay. They're asleep. They're playing in the backyard. The house is trashed. People have been assaulted, but the kids haven't noticed. The police must check on those children now. They can't just be satisfied that they're in the bedroom. They have to check on them, make sure they're okay. There's a greater awareness at that point. At a safety action meeting, child protection information is not something that can't be shared. If there are issues of protection for the kids, they must be put on the table. And where, for instance, with housing, they wouldn't be bringing to the table information about rental arrears or things of that nature, that must relate directly to the victim's safety and that immediacy. And that applies to the children as well. So we've had, certainly from Indigenous workers, we had lots of discussions and there was a lot of challenges on both sides in relation to fears of children being lifted, because we know that more Aboriginal children are lifted than non-Aboriginal children in child protection matters. So there was a real fear there, and I don't want to get into a toing and a froing about that. But we found that the process of a SAM has meant that less children are being removed, because the facts people who are at the table, and this was a little bit unexpected, because of all the other things that are being put in place for people, they have said, we're not going to allocate that case, we're just going to keep a watching eye, because all of these other supports have been put in place, so we're not going to go there. So it has in fact had an effect where children haven't been removed, at least not. I don't think there's been a SAM where children have been removed as a result of any information presented at a SAM. Certainly there have been children removed, but it's been to do with other issues and outside of that safety action meeting process.
I guess we're looking at those, and that's great information. I guess we're looking at it in the back of my mind. I've got a couple of cases where I can think of women who have been in this situation and at high threat of domestic violence, etc., and they would still refuse that, refuse the apply. So are the children then treated as individuals in their own right, or are they still being looked at as a parent?
Well, if information came to that SAM meeting in relation to the children, whether they've been assaulted, affected in whatever way, if it was a child protection issue, there is facts workers at the table, child protection workers at the table, that would take that information on board. Regardless of whether the mother decided to take on the other things that were being put. We had a matter in one of our SAMs where the family had been presented to the SAM a few times, and there were really complex, a number of issues for the family, but not just domestic violence. And currently the perpetrator of the violence was on parole. His parole conditions stated that they weren't to live together, and information came to this SAM meeting that they were together. Corrections are, I found, this was all new to me, a very powerful person at the table, because they have other ways that they can punish a perpetrator in terms of breaching parole or probation, and other methods of removing them from the situation that the police can't. So different legislation, different options for them. So when the corrections a person became aware that there was a breach to his conditions, they went around that afternoon to the location, to the perpetrator's residence, to do a visit to check, as they would normally, but they may not have been going on that day. And when they went into the property, they discovered a baby that was a few months old was unresponsive. So the baby was revived and transported to hospital, had 4 days in hospital, I think, and was okay. But it was really clear that if that visit hadn't happened at that time, it's not likely that that baby would have survived. So that kind of thing, that's a rare thing, but it really does, one sort of outcome like that for me is like gold. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to finish about the last part of your question. Oh, the border stuff. Very challenging, and we have looked at it, particularly in our Tweed Heads location. Not so much Albury, Wodonga. We haven't had as many issues, or down south from Broken Hill, because Broken Hill and South Australia services tend to work fairly effectively and cooperatively together anyway. But we're yet to roll out in the Albury area, so we haven't experienced it yet. Tweed Heads we do a lot, because there are people who moved from, and even like a small example of the bikie situation, like they've moved into New South Wales to escape those laws that were introduced in Queensland in terms of their intermingling and all that. And so crimes are committed up there, but they live in New South Wales. There's a lot of cross-border work to be done. I've had conversations with the Cross-Border Commissioner, who's very open to working out ways of dealing with that. So we certainly are aware of the because the ABOs are different in every state, the whole range of things. Getting people brought back to New South Wales to face charges even from across the board is a challenge. So I know that's not an answer, but yeah, we're on it, so to speak.
We've got time for one more question.
Just a quick question. So in SAM meetings or SAC meetings, like when you say that it's not case management, do you work with a lead agency? Like if it is like child protection and facts or intense family, does that lead agency then get all the information?
Yeah, if it was a child protection issue, it would be a facts child protection person that would take that bring the information and take the information on. The local coordination point, though, would be making referrals. Should be making referrals to local agencies anyway that are relevant for that victim according to what they need and want. The whole idea is that a person doesn't get a whole range of phone calls from a lot of different agencies, and then that leads to them.
Should be there a lead.
Well, the LCP could be it, or in your case, if it's a person that's been, a service that's been dealing with that client for a long period of time, they might be the one that, does the toing and froing with the client.
I think that's all we've got time for, because clearly morning 3 has started, so thank you, Chair.